All right, it's a weird day, but let's get to work. If some of the things we've been talking about now might seem redundant, so just know there's more things to come. Like we're going to get into the exceptions to the rules where you need an agonistic group pulling in the opposite direction of an external force. Sometimes you want two forces to be on one side of the tug of war, making the rope go fast. Sometimes you need muscles pulling in the same direction as gravity. And then we're going to also get into the essence of what speeds up must slow down. So within the element of concentrics and eccentrics, there comes the muscle will purposefully choose to be less than the weight. But in the same eccentrics, the muscle, when it comes time to slowing down the movement, has to be greater than the weight. And then the muscle to change the direction has to continue to be greater than the weight to speed up the concentric. But yet the muscle chooses to let off so that the concentric can slow down. Like there's going to be some more details that we're going to get into. That's going to be, I think, fun. We're also going to transition into what exactly plyometrics means. Where in the repetition does that actually happen? And spoiler alert, it's not the full eccentric followed by the full concentric. It's specifically the change in direction where the eccentric is going to slow down motion one way, change the direction, and the concentric will speed up motion the other way. It's specifically that window because that's where the damage happens. When you're putting on the brakes, ropes never pop when they're shortening. They always pop when they're being pulled apart. You've never had to probably, I don't mean to judge your vehicles, but you go in to change your brakes, not your gas pedal. So with braking, with something being pulled apart, there's a lot more damage involved. That's why with eccentrics, there's a lot more delayed onset muscle soreness. So we are getting to other things. We're also going to get into stretching concepts and how can we use the concepts that we're developing to not just guess what groups and what muscles are stretching, but to know how to stretch things because of joint motion or joint position, because muscles only pull. So that puts us in a position of power and leverage to understand these concepts throughout the whole body. Okay. I left the door open. You're welcome. You're welcome. You can sit in your normal place. Why? It's like 10 feet.
It's all right.
All right, it's okay. So what I'd like to nuance today. Yeah, yeah. Well,
I always thought plyometrics meant something different. I'm unfamiliar with the term plyometrics because I always thought jump like the
wow, what a great point. So things can have multiple meanings through application. So in other words, isometrics can be a type of muscle work, but we can advance it to mean that it's a certain type of exercise regimen, right? So it's not to say you're wrong, you're going to do these plyometric exercises and do plyometrics. It's just that in the heart of what that term really means, it's a sequence, it's a sequence of specific contractions where the muscle is changing direction of the joint motions because the muscle has to change the direction. It has to be greater than the weight. And so what's really cool about the plyometric sequence is that it's the only two things a structure that pulls can do back to back. So what I mean by that is if I had a rope tied to the cart and I shortened it to me, the rope can't push it to a stop, right? Like I can't be responsible for the cart moving away from me. All I can do when I shorten it, when I concentrically contract, is bring it to me, and then I'm done. I need either friction or I need something else. However, if the cart's rolling away from me and I start pulling, I can slow the cart down while it's moving away, change its direction, and speed the cart up while it's coming to me. So plyometric sequence is, and then that's applied to those box jumps and other things, because those muscles have to change your direction. They have to put on the brake and then put on the gas immediately after. So all of those like application definitions kind of evolve from the essence of the sequence itself, and that is an agonistic group changing the direction of motion because they change the types of contractions they do. You're going to put on the, think about a bungee. It used to be popular when I was a kid, but bungee jumping, like, people would jump and basically the rubber band would slow them down. So the plyometric sequence of that bungee cord would be you jump off, gravity speed you up. Well, once that cord has tension, that cord is slowing you down as you go down. It's going to change the direction, speed you up, coming up. And where you're most concerned would be at the very, very bottom, because that's where the most stress is on that structure. That's where, by popping, it's the same with muscle. So it's not to say that's not a working, functional, layman's terms definition of the application, but the word originally is a sequence of contractions where the muscle is putting on the brake eccentrically, changing the direction and putting on the gas concentrically.
And it's the same or different name, the opposite happens.
You can't have the opposite happen.
Okay.
If the opposite, right, nuance. A muscle cannot be responsible for constant. Let me give you an example. Okay. It's kind of a play off of the court, but it's going to have application to our body. All right. My arm's laying on the table. There's no external force trying to flex me or extend me, right? So because muscles can only pull, if I want to flex my elbow, if I want to speed up elbow flexion, I can't use my extensors to push me, right? So I have to use my flexors to make flex. Now, my flexors are like, I only pull. So once I do this, I need something else to move it back the other way. In the case of a curl, it's gravity, right? Gravity is going to be, that's why I'll use the keyword in eccentrics, be lengthened. A muscle cannot lengthen itself. But once it's being lengthened, it can pull even harder to start putting on the brake. I was at a conference a long time ago, and at the conference, this person, it was a small conference, so it's not like there's a lot of people, but in this room, this biomechanist made the point, and I understand what he meant, but nuance and technicality, and probably my autism. He said there are no eccentrics when you're in orbit, and when you're in space, not necessarily in space, but when you're in orbit, there's no eccentrics. What he meant is that there's nothing trying to make you go anywhere, so concentrically you have to speed up. But I politely raised my hand and I was like, well, how are you going to slow it down if it wasn't for eccentrics? He was like, oh, right. Like, because they were just thinking of the speed up, not the slow down. So in other words, if my elbow in this position, gravity's not trying to flex or extend me, but if I flex and extend real fast, and I speed up the extension with tricep and anconeus, my elbow extensions concentric, what's going to slow that down? The same muscles can't push me to a stop. So my flexors have to put on the brake and then put on the gas. And then my extensors have to put on the brake and then put on the gas. And then my flexor, that's plyometrics. Putting on the brake, putting on the gas, putting on the brake, putting on the gas. So when you do like box jumps and these kind of plyometric-y things, it's putting your agonist in a position where they have to brake, change the direction, followed by gas to speed you up. And when you do that in small windows of time, that puts more force on the agonist, right?
Since the opposite is volatile, where it's not going to be.
Yeah, so this would be the opposite. And I apologize for not getting to the crux of your awesome question. The opposite is the external force would have its own type of plyometric sequence. So in other words, if I'm doing curls, what's the easiest part kind of at the top? Because I could just let go and gravity could slow me down and gravity could speed me up. If I'm doing preacher curls, especially because I think it helps emphasize this point, where's the hardest part? Not up here. changing your direction here is really tough because your muscles have to be able to slow it down and then speed it up. But up here, if all I did was keep my flexors working and tying, I would never go down. So my flexors have to let off. So it's almost kind of like the exercise, the external forces have their sequence where they're greater, and then the muscles have their sequence where they're greater. It's not that the muscles aren't working above rest. It's just that if my muscles never let the weight be greater, I would never go down unless my extensors are greater. Yeah, absolutely. So that's why, like, let's say we were doing the leg extension machine, right? And we don't clang in this class. But if you have an external force that's trying to flex you, your muscles have to change the direction down here. You have to make it slow down and then speed up. But at the top, gravity could slow down your extension and speed up your flexion. So I don't need a plyometric sequence here. I need my plyometric sequence down here. It's all trade-offs. And so to answer your question, the opposite of that would be nothing. You don't need your muscles to be responsible for the change in direction because your muscles actually have to let off to let the machine or gravity or the external forces change your direction. And so that's very important. We're going to progress to that later. Because of the rain, we're just kind of have open conversations, which I love. That's where, as future therapists, personal trainers, fitness trainers, you have to understand that not all of the range of motion is created equal. There's going to be trade-offs with periods where your muscles are working more than the weight you think you're doing, less than, and there's periods where there's constant angular velocity where it's actually doing the weight itself. Like it's actually doing, whatever the plate is or whatever the weight is. That's why slow and controlled is so good in rehab and therapy, because you spend more time in the exercise actually doing the weight as long as you keep it at cruise control. But anytime you're speeding up something or slowing something down, one force has to be greater than the other force. Thank Isaac Newton. But yeah, does that answer that? That's a great question. But yeah, you don't have plyometric sequences in an exercise slow and controlled. You can have plyometric sequences of different agonists. Give an example, like if we're doing jumping jacks as fast as we can, my abductors are going to speed up my abduction. But I don't want gravity. Gravity is actually a very weak force. Gravity is weak. Little babies are born and could beat gravity. Not maybe with all their joints, but I mean, gravity is super weak. So if I'm trying to do jumping jacks and I let gravity slow me down and speed me up, we could do a thought experiment. Right? So if I'm trying to go faster than that, I want to slow it down faster than what gravity can offer. I actually want to start yanking down with some muscles that are pulling down. So I'm going to use my adductors eccentrically to put on the brake, change my direction, and speed up my adduction with the same muscles working concentrically. So the adductors, their plyometric sequence is going to be on the top. But when I get down here, assuming I don't slow me down because of collision, if I want to slow down my adduction, these muscles aren't going to do it. So I got to turn these off, and now I got to use abductors to put on the brake eccentrically, change my direction, and speed up abduction concentric. So within the jumping jack, I have a plyometric sequence of downward pullers up here, and I have a plyometric sequence of upward pullers down here. So there can be where you have plyometric sequences of different agonistic groups, depending on who you need to put on the brake and then turn on. And that happens like in sprinting too, right? So like if someone's sprinting as fast as they can and their extension is happening, gravity could slow down that extension. Not as fast as what I probably want. So I'm going to use my flexors to help gravity slow down the extension, speed up my flexion. They're going to turn off. I'm going to use my extensors to slow down the flexion, speed up my extension. And so they're going to take turns having their own plyometric sequence. No different if you were doing like a shuffle drill. I forgot the name of it. We used to use with racers, where you you'd run to one side, right? You go to the other side. So like if what was the name of it? Yeah, but it involved a racer. It's like you had to grab one and put it back. It was like an agility kind of change or racer. Yeah, shuttle runs. And so if I need to change my direction this way, I need friction from the ground here, and then I change direction, so I need friction around. Yeah, so it's kind of similar. To change my direction in two different ways, I need two different agonists doing their own set of plyometric sequences. But in an exercise that's slow and controlled with one external force, thus one agonist, I only need I only need that one agonist to change my direction in a specific place. And so like if I'm doing curls, that plyometric sequence is going to happen here. If I'm doing tricep exercise, we got to imagine it's trying to flex me, my plyometric sequence is going to be up here. If I'm doing lateral raises, assuming that I don't go all the way down where there's, no torque at all. So let's say I hold it right here, my plyometric sequence is going to be down here. I got to slow it down and then but up here, gravity. Any other questions about anything else? This is fun. Okay. Well, feel free if y'all do. So the importance of joint motion. Joint motion and joint position have a hand in all of this stuff. How do we determine agonists? What joint motion is the external force in an exercise trying to do to me? And I wanted to emphasize this today is that some pictures are going to be obvious, but if the exercise hasn't started yet, so in other words, let's say I was doing the lateral raise one and my start position, my arms on the side, well, gravity's not trying to do anything to me here, right? So in that case, although technically, just ask yourself, what would gravity or the external forces in the machine be trying to do during the exercise itself? So in other words, just imagine, well, here's the start, here's the finish, because I got to give you context, because what if I go here, right? So during the exercise, you could say, all right, gravity's not trying to do anything here, but 99.99% of the time, gravity's trying to abduct me. So I need abduct. And so when I see the abduction, concentric, when I see the abduction, eccentric. That makes sense? So sometimes students will be like, well, wait, the external force isn't technically trying to make me do anything. And I'm like, well, yeah, but when you go from there to there, what's it trying to do to me, right? Okay. So we use joint motion to identify our agonist. Obviously, we use joint motion to identify the joint motion. And then the contraction is actually proven. Contraction is proven. So in the case of lateral raises, abductors do abduction through concentrics. Abductors do adduction through eccentrics. Flexors do flexion through concentrics. Flexors do extension through eccentrics. But what we don't want to memorize is flexors do flexion through concentric. So anytime I see flexion, it must be, right? We figure out the agonist. That's why we do that. We figure it out. I could do flexion. Let's say Ken, multi-purpose Ken doll is going to be a dumbbell. Let's say I was doing some exercise like this. Right? So I have flexion, but it's not my flexors. Does that make sense? So gravity wants to do this. I'm going to use the flexors. So that's why we figure out the agonist. Who do I need? Because I understand why I need them. And then once we identify that, the rest is easy. So think of it like this. It's like going up. I don't want to say a slide because that's kind of easy. Anybody ever been to a water park where like they have a fun slide, but you gotta like climb up like a billion steps to get up to it? So it's like the agonist is climbing the stairs to like a fun water slide. So that takes work, it takes thought, it takes figuring out. But once you have this, then like chutes and ladders, man. Like this is the ladder, and then this is the chute. It should be just literally going down the slide. So the emphasis of this, I think, is the most important part. Hopefully, if after the first and second test, this should be like going down a slide. And contractions traditionally for our students, and not just you, not just me, a lot of students across the country, contractions. you can learn what they are and like know the definition, but can you identify it? Do you know what it looks like? Can we apply it? And so hopefully with this technique, it's like, all right, I know this is the hardest part. This is an is. And again, going down the slide, this is proven. Okay. All right, let's do some examples. Shall we? Any questions, clarifications? Those of you watching now or into the future, or my great grandkids might be watching. Today is a little different. We had a lot of rain then. So usually in my classes, when I'm making a point like that, everybody usually cheers. The reason you don't hear that today is and that's why we call it eccentric. Like the TikTok videos where like someone does like a, how do my kids say it, burn. All right, guys, let's have some fun. Someone name me, and again, we're going to get to, probably starting Friday, we're going to get to exceptional exceptions. And it's not exception of physics, it's just sometimes you need agonists in the same direction as external forces. Again, like if I have a mosquito on my leg, and yeah, sure, gravity can bring it to me, but I kind of want to get the mosquito, so I want to use muscles in the same direction. You imagine that being at a fair, you know, the active strength where you take like a mallet. I mean, so I mean, sometimes there are reasons to try to go in the same direction, but they're very rare and they're very practical. There's a practical reason to run with the rule. Somebody give me, let's start off easy. And the reason we're doing this too is to empower you guys to be able to practice. So what I mean by that is I get a lot of feedback from students, can you do more practice? Can you do more practice? Can you practice? It's like, yeah, but we also got work to do. So I want to show you how you can practice. And then if there's any questions, that's when you come to me before class or email and I can bring it up in class. So, you know, Google is your friend. So somebody think of just a traditional exercise, maybe that we haven't done yet, and I'll pull it up and we'll analyze it. Or give you a bottom line. Doesn't have to be. What's that? Back squat? Let's check it out. So remember, we analyze agonists joint by joint. Okay. Now here, I'm so glad you brought this question up. A lot of students, we are pattern recognizers. That's what our ancestors pattern recognize with sun, stars, food. We pattern recognize. And sometimes that can be great. I'm trying to get another skunk in our yard, and being able to know that skunk, based on what I know about skunks, could be potentially bad news if I get too close to it. We pattern recognize. Sometimes, though, that could be a detriment to us because that sometimes means we assume. Right? Okay. So some students would say, well, I thought in an exercise, slow and controlled external forces, the first movement will always be concentric. No, there's no rule that says the first movement has to be concentric. Maybe in a lot of exercises it is, but it doesn't have to be. Right? So you can imagine taking a bar off of a bench press. The first movement isn't going to be concentric, or in this case, a squat. You take it off the squat rack. You're not going to start. It makes sense. You're going to start in this position, and your first movement's going to be eccentric. So again, don't try to pattern recognize. Try to solve it like we have been doing with the clues we gave. So let's we analyze motion joint by joint. We analyze agonist joint by joint. So how about we start with a knee conversation? Okay. So the squat, grounding gravity is trying to flex my knees. Right? I don't need knee flexion pullers. I pull my feet off. Right? In fact, like if you were doing a vertical jump, that's one way you can speed up going down is to literally pull your feet off the ground and kind of let gravity kind of speed you up a little bit. You don't want to do that. Use your knee flexors to pull your feet off the ground. You need your knee extension. So I identify my agonist. I need knee extension pullers. Why does Campbell use that and not quads? Because quads doesn't infer who I need and how they're going to pull. It's a heck of a lot easier to say, oh, the quads are knee extensors. It is to say, to really understand why I need certain muscles because of external forces. Okay? So I need knee extensors from left to right. I observe knee flexion. Knee extensors do knee flexion through eccentrics. Coming back up, I observe knee extension. Knee extensors do knee extension through concentrics. I'm warning you, I'm going to ask this type of question, and the type of answers I'm going to give are knee flexors, concentric, knee flexors, eccentric, knee extensors, concentric, knee extensors. And I'm telling you, it's unfortunate, but some students are going to try to tell me that you're going to be using your flexors from left to right and your extensors from right to left. And I'll be like, you're not getting up if you use your flexors from left to right. And there's a valid reason, because we're pattern recognizers. And they're like, well, I thought that these muscles do this motion. See what I'm getting at? Yeah.
So so the answer would be knee flexion or knee extension.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Your knee extensors.
Okay, so left to right, that's how you read it.
Mm-hmm. Or start, yeah, hard start to finish, but without, so if on the test, no, you're good.
I thought you were talking about like the direction.
You're fine. I'm glad you brought this up. On the test, I have time, it takes me a lot of time to insert word texts into the picture. Does that make sense? So like I could go in and say, this is your start, this is your finish. When I'm pulling up pictures randomly on Google, I don't have that luxury of start to finish. So I'll use terms like from left to right and from right to left.
Oh yeah, no, I heard you say it.
You did nothing wrong. I'm explaining why I don't use start to finish, because where am I starting, where am I finishing? So I have to use some kind of reference of here to there, there to here. So I'm glad you brought that up. So does that make sense? Same external forces, same agonist. There's going to be exceptions. I'm going to teach that to you. But 90+% of the time, I use this analogy sometimes and I like it. Usain Bolt, famous sprinter, like that was his job. I mean, I'm sure he still sprints, but professionally. How much of his life do you actually think he spent going faster than gravity, right? Like how much, as a percentage of his time, how much time do you think he spent sprinting? So in other words, these are very rare occurrences when you go faster. A majority of our movements are going to be slow and controlled in opposite directions of external forces. That's why we spend so much time looking at those things. Okay? Knee extensors. Well, who are those muscles? Well, we're going to learn them in biomechanics. But before I say, hey, the muscles that pull in the direction of knee extension are your vastus medialis, lateralis, and medius, rectus femoris. Here's how they run. Here's how they cross. None of that tells us how they pull. None of it. So again, it's a cheat code. You know, if I just say, what does Bobby do? I don't know. Bobby could do anything. He could be a lawyer. He could be a painter. He could be a teacher. But if I say fireman Bobby, you know exactly what Bobby does. So it's the fireman part that's knee extensors. It's the police part that's hip extensors. It's the nurse part that's the abductors. And then when we get into the individual muscles, we could say, this is Jimmy, this is Sally, this is Bobby, but Bobby is a fireman, Bobby is a nurse, Sally is a policeman, Sally is a farmer. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, what about the hips? Let's keep it sagittally. External forces, ground and gravity, trying to squish you like an accordion, trying to cause hip flexion. You don't need your hip flexion pullers. You literally yank you again help you yank your feet off the ground. You need hip extension pullers. Campbell, why don't you just say glute maximus? Well, we'll get to it eventually, but to really understand, it's, well, how does the gluteus maximus pull? How does it pull? It pulls in a direction of hip extension. That's cool. So I'm not disrespecting glute maximus. I'm just trying to start off with, hey, we need, whether it's 2 or 20, we need any muscles that pull in that direction to help do this job. And a lot of times I've emphasized this in previous classes, when we only say biceps, we only say glute max, when we only say there's other muscles that are like, am I not here? Am I not contributing to the team? Did I not score 12 points? And we won by 3 and I contributed? So by giving the group name, you're accounting for everybody. And just like how in the medical field they have physician desk references, there's a reference because it's impossible to memorize everything. If you understand that, hey, I need hip extensors in this exercise, and you forget who they are, go look them up. Big whoop. That's geography. That's the easy part. The harder part is knowing who you need and understanding why you need it. That's the part that you're not going to find in a traditional book because that's nuanced. An analogy that I've said before, or maybe I have, or maybe I haven't, because I get criticized sometimes because I don't just follow a book. And I'll say, you show me a book that has this specific math problem, and 485,462.4 minus 345. Just random numbers. No math book has that specific problem. But you know why it's not a big deal? Because we know how to do math. Guys, you're going to have clients, you're going to have patients, you're going to have athletes that have never been in a book. And you're going to have to use your toolkit. You're going to have to use your practice. You're going to have to use your experience. And you're going to have to learn how to do math.
This is just a question regarding
Right.
mechanics. Do we also, like, in addition to just learning what muscles are used in each, do we learn the larger and lesser contributors? Absolutely.
Yes. And I think next level nerd stuff, I'm just speaking for me. Some people don't think this is nerdy. I'm also teach you how we can vary contribution muscles based on their length tension relationship. So in other words, I'm going to teach you why it is that when I'm doing a seated calf raise, that emphasizes different agonists. And when I'm standing, it emphasizes. It's like if we have the same muscles that are playing tug of war, but I can manipulate other joints so that one muscle now is only pulling with one hand. And so other muscles have to take up that slack. And so I'm going to teach you some nuances of that in biomechanics. Yeah. Now, there's other muscles involved. Plantar, we can look at ankle. Ground and gravity is trying to dorsiflex you. So your plantar flexors, even though you don't go on your tiptoes, plantar flexion pullers can help make you plantar flex to anatomical, so we could play that game. Isometrically, there's stuff happening at your trunk to try to maintain your posture while you're going down. Absolutely, your erector spinae. But, again, if I say erector spinae, or if I say longissimus, iliocastalis, spinalis, rotator, it's just, again, Sally, Bobby, Tittany. But if I say my trunk extensors, the muscles that pull in the direction of trunk extension, guys, you have hundreds of muscles in your erector spinae. And just by saying your trunk extensors, it covers all of them. And if I want to know all of them, let's go look up the roster of the teams. Who was on the '09 Saints Super Bowl? I'll look that up. I mean, I know who the most valuable players were, but there were other players. Who was the starting left tackle? Who was the starting Jamon Bushra? But so that's kind of what I'm trying to reprogram my students is traditionally we think the only muscles we have application for is the quads, the glutes, the hams, the core, the bicep, the tricep. And I know it's overwhelming to try to learn all the different muscles. That's why I'm trying to simplify. Forget all those fancy muscles. Let's understand that we have groups in every direction of motion. We have ulnar deviators, radial deviators, flexors, extensors, pronators, supinators. And let's play with that simpler verbiage. And then once we're playing that really well and we have a mastery of that, then we can get into all the different major contributing specific muscles. Great suggestion. Anybody else have another one? What we do a non-active? What's that? Okay, let's do it. I'm not literally. All right, I'm glad you brought this one up because ups and downs can get students in trouble. So what do I mean by that? You're working, we might have did this last class. Did we go over that? Where like a pull-up is the same muscles as the lat pull down, but one exercise has the word up in it and the other has the word down in it. And so that messes with students. And it shouldn't if we treat every exercise the same, and that's we don't assume. We don't assume. What's the external force trying to do to me? Oh, analyze motion joint by joint, analyze muscles joint by joint. So let's go shoulder, mostly frontal. Gravity wants to pull the plates down, but thanks to pulleys, the cable is trying to pull the bar up. And so since the bar is trying to pull up, it's trying to pull my arms up. So it's trying to abduct my shoulders. So I need adduction pullers. I need muscles that are trying to adduct my shoulders. When I see abduction, that's going to be eccentric. When I see adduction, it's going to be concentric. The lat pull down exercise is trying to extend my elbows. So I don't need tricep and conus. I don't need extension pullers. I need flexion pullers. Scapula, the exercise is trying to upwardly rotate me and elevate me. So I need downward rotators and depressors. That make sense? So again, lat pull down. It's about the bar moving about the fixed body. But in a pull up, we have a movable body moving about a fixed bar. So I may ask a question about, the pull-up, and someone may miss it because, well, when I go down with the lat pull down, I'm doing this. But when you go down with your body, but when you need shoulder extenders, when you're coming like for going down, no. Well, there's always going to be a combination of motion, but that's why I said frontal. So where you would use mostly shoulder extensors, mostly, there's always going to be combinations, right? There's kinesiologically 50 shades of gray. Where you would use primarily extensors is if you brought your hands in closer and like you were like doing like reverse grip stuff, right? So that way it's very obvious that it's a sagittal kind of external force that's a sagittal agonistic. But having the elbows out laterally, mostly that's going to be frontal stuff. So there's always going to be kind of this combination of things. But on the test, that's where I'm going to clarify. I'm going to say, based off of the visuals, let's do frontal plane analysis of this shoulder. So that would eliminate the extensor as terms of what I'm asking for. That makes sense? So if I wanted to ask you an extensor, I would do something like this, where most of that motion would be sagittal and not most of the front. That answer that?
Yes.
Okay, it's a good question. I just want to make sure I answer it. So in this case, if you relaxed all your muscles except for your finger flexors, you would fall down, but the same motions would happen as if you relaxed all your muscles and fall down. It'd be the same motion. The same motions would happen when the bar goes up or you go down. It's the same relative motion. So what's ground, but in this case, not ground, but gravity. Gravity's trying to do the same things to you as bar. It's trying to abduct you. It's trying to extend you, abduct your shoulders, extend your elbows. It's trying to upwardly rotate your scapula. It's trying to elevate your scapula. Make sense? So you would need muscles that are trying to do the opposite. You need muscles that are trying to adduct your shoulders. You need muscles that are trying to flex your elbows. You need muscles that are trying to downward rotate your scapula. You need muscles that are trying to depress your scapula. Let me give you another one that students will get confused on. And that's this. So again, I'm not disrespecting other things. I'm just basically saying from an element of shoulder elevation and depression, look how from left to right, it's more like a shrug. I'm not saying it's exactly like a shrug, but there's scapular elevation from left to right and scapular depression from right to left.
With shoulder, with elbow, with the position of the elbow being real, like, when you feel the landmark of how close it is to the body and what it might be working. Like if we're trying to set up a picture of how, because like for this one, the shoulder, the elbows are here close to the body, it's the shoulder, and then how wide, could you use that as like?
I'm just using what this photo is giving us. Nothing more, nothing less. And in this exercise, gravity and those bars are trying to flex my elbows. Nothing more, nothing less. So because the external forces are trying to flex my elbows, I don't need flexion pullers. What do I need? I need elbow extension. At the scapula, the exercise is trying to elevate my scapula. I need depressors. So that's what I was trying to get at, that some students will miss it because they'll say, oh, well, I see elevation and I do elevation in a shrug. And I'm like, wow, that's not the same exercise. Because their brains want to pattern recognize specific motions with specific muscles. That makes sense? It's a great question, but all we can do is go off of the evidence that we have. So if you're working with a soccer kid, you're working on like their mechanics or their range of motion, their psyche. And although you can use other life experiences to help shape them, mold them, coach them, you just play in the hand that you're dealt. Okay? Just play the hand that you're dealt. And the reason I'm saying that it's important for we have about 80 students here today, guys. But I'm also bringing it up because on the test, I don't want you to make a question into something that it's. We don't want to put anything into a question. We don't want to take anything out of a question. We just want to answer the question. I know it's easier said than done, but trust that I'm not gonna assess your application outside of what I'm giving you. The clues or the givens, that's it. I can't assume anything that's not there. It's all gonna be a given. If it's not, I'll own it. All right, how about some in-class stuff? See if I can find radio and point. I want you to be able to answer the following questions. And the reason I'm saying this is because on the test, I might ask any of these variables. What joint motion is the external force trying to cause? What would my agonistic group be? And identifying the concentric and eccentric contraction. Okay, so let's do this. Start. So this is where I start. Okay, and then you observe this. There's my start position. I bring it up to you. Now, some students in the past, and I guess it's rightfully so, it's always good to ask. But I remember on the first test, a student asked a very good question. Can we bring our own kin dolls? It's like, that's a real good question. Let me think about it. And my answer was no, because you need to learn to either be the kin doll or to be able to see what the kin doll is doing, right? So it's very similar. You may not be able to do, when we get older, we can't reenact some of the things our younger athletes do. Like if I'm working with college football players, I can't jump in there and show them how to clean 400 pounds. We may not be able to do it, but we have to be able to see it, right? Okay. So external force is trying to do what to my radioulnar joint? Pronate me. I need supinators. Now that I established my agonist, all I got to do, I'm going down the slide. The hard work's done. If I observe supination, that's got to be concentric, shortening of those muscles. And if I observe pronation, that's got to be eccentric, being lengthened of those muscles. In this case, you observed supination. So it had to be concentric work. Make sense? Now, what about this? Would be a fun transition. Last question. I know we got a couple minutes. But for a whole range of motion, that doesn't mean it's the same muscles, especially when we're just dealing with gravity. So watch. If I do a full range of supination, once I get past here, gravity is no longer trying to pronate. Gravity is trying to supinate me now. So in this quadrant, I'm using supinators, but as soon as I tip over here, I'm using pronators. Watch. Pronators concentric, supinators eccentric, supinators concentric, pronators eccentric. It's a full range of motion done by different agonists through different contractions. And the reason you're able to understand and know that is because you understand how to identify agonists. Make sense? All right, guys. Y'all have a dry rest of your day. Thank y'all for your questions. It's always better. All right, be well.